Hello ladies. Today again I'm going to do a little lesson on the dignity of dress and how important it is to care about what you wear. And I know way back in the 1960s, the first time I heard somebody say, "I don't care what I wear," I was so shocked. And I was a teenager and I thought, where is this coming from? But the whole idea behind it, I think, is to get people to accept dressing with less dignity, with less care, and then we'll all be content to wear very non-significant clothing, and we won't care about color, we won't care about neatness or beauty or anything like that. So I'm going to take you through some ideas about the purpose of clothing and of dressing well. So we'll start with the first chapter of the Bible, where Adam and Eve sewed together some fig leaves to cover themselves. And so dress is, you have to get the message that dress is for modesty and for coverings and for protection. And later on we see that God sewed better clothing for them to replace that was more durable. And so dignity, modesty, protection, and identity are the things that I'm going to cover today. So we'll start with dignity, because dignity is something that clothing used to make you feel. You felt like, when was the last time you wore something that made you feel like sitting up straighter, that made you feel more regal or regal? When was the last time you tried on clothing that you just felt so wonderful in that you had to buy it? I don't remember any such feeling since around the 1990s. It kind of stopped. All the clothing was so synthetic and stretchy, and it didn't actually hide anything. It didn't actually structure your body in a way that made you feel like you had some dignity. So I've seen a change, and a lot of people could tell you that they have seen a change in the feeling that clothing gives you. And a lot of reasons that the women in the 60s went to the pantsuit was because the clothing selection was not very appealing. So the best they could do was select pantsuits, those polyester pantsuits. There just really wasn't anything available. And even in home sewing, the fabrics all changed and the patterns changed. And so we're kind of at a loss to think for ourselves sometimes when we're dependent on what's sold. And that's one of the reasons that I love to sew, is because no one can control what I wear. Now, the dress that I'm wearing today, I actually got the idea from a Chadwick's catalog a couple of summers ago, when they had a dress that looked kind of like this print. And so I went to Walmart and I got the fabric and made one for myself at much less cost. Sometimes those dresses are pretty high, up to $70. And when you are a homemaker, you want to make your money stretch a long ways. So with dignity, let's just talk about, how do you feel? Do you feel dignified? Now, a lot of people have never ever felt that. They don't feel dignified. But can you remember when you bought new clothes for your children and they put them on and they were so happy, and they just kind of stood it in a different way because they loved this new feeling of the newness of clothing? Now, of course, you could argue with me about that, because some children don't respond to new clothes very well. But I'm just talking about the ones that do. So the other thing is covering. Adam and Eve had to have a covering. And then also for modesty. That's the purpose of clothing, is for modesty. One of the problems with tattoos, women are getting more tattoos, which is a terrible shame, because they're not thinking practically or economically, because you cannot reuse, you cannot sell that tattoo. But you could sell your dress on Craigslist. Or you could get a new hat and sell it, or you could sell it in a garage sale, or you could hand it down to someone. But you can't do that with a tattoo. Tattoos are very expensive. And once you get them all over your back, all over your neck and chest and your shoulders, then of course you want to show them. So you have to wear very bare clothing that isn't very comfortable. and you have to and then of course if you get a conviction that you shouldn't have tattoos, then you've got to wear clothing that's going to cover all that. So there's a problem. I would suggest, instead of, if you're considering getting a tattoo, instead of doing that, buy a new dress, because you could get a lot more out of that. And people's moods change. We like patterns of certain things when we're younger that we don't no longer like when we're older. And if you get a tattoo, you're stuck with something that you liked one time that you might not like now. So do yourself a favor economically and healthfully. Don't get a tattoo. And if you have a tattoo, then you're going to have to figure out how you're going to cover it up. And do you want to be identified for something that you thought was awfully cute when you were younger, but later on your tastes change or your values change? With clothing, you can throw the dress away if your tastes and values change, or if you discover that maybe the style or the print is not modest. You don't have to keep it. So that's one thing that I think the advantage of clothing is also you can change your mind a lot. And if you've ever been kind of in a slump, in the doldrums, a new dress is always so exciting. So let's move on to protection. Clothing was designed in the first place, I believe, for protection. It's to cover your nakedness. That's what Adam and Eve were doing when they covered themselves with fig leaves, was to cover themselves. They sewed themselves garments, and so it's modesty is essential. That's the first thing, and the other thing is for protection. Now, whether the weather is hot or whether the weather is cold, your skin is the outer layer of your entire immune system, and you're compromising that immune system by exposing your skin to too much of something, too cold, too hot, and you can also damage your skin. So clothing is such a wonderful protection. I myself prefer sleeves on clothing. I'm not comfortable without them, and I understand that some people think that it's okay to go almost bare, but think about the tenderness of your skin and how important it is to protect it. And that's the beauty of clothing. Now, if you're going to have to be modest and you're going to have to protect your skin, and you're going to have dignity, then why not choose things that are beautiful to wear? So one of the things that I noticed about clothing is it identifies you. Now, that is for lack of a better word, because identity does not mean the little card that tells when you were born and where you live and what your driver's license is. The identity I'm talking about is it identifies your beliefs. It tells something about you, and even from a distance. If you're wearing something that's beautiful, that's covers you, that has modesty and dignity, it feeds the mind of other people in some way. And this might be hard to understand at first, but you might go and observe how you think, where your mind goes. Go to a grocery store and notice how people are dressed, and notice what you think and how it affects you. I know that when I see someone that is well dressed and I like what they're wearing, it makes me smile. That has ministered to me. So think of your clothing as ministry. Think of the way you dress as something you're doing for others, because most of us are a little uncomfortable, a lot uncomfortable with being too vain, being too narcissistic, being too thinking about ourselves, thinking about our clothes all the time. But it is not just for your protection and for your modesty and for your dignity, but it has an effect on the eye of the beholder. It has an effect on other people. And the feedback that they can give you sometimes is really nice, because you feel a little bit more reinforced by who you are, because of what someone says about how they appreciate how you dress. And we're not fishing for compliments all the time. We're just trying to do our best. We're trying to please the Lord. We're trying to show our gratitude to God and to reflect his beautiful creation and his love for us. Also, it projects outward to other people. Now, one thing that wearing a dress and beautiful clothing will do for you, and I'm not saying, please don't send me those comments about I wore my prom dress to the grocery store, because that's not funny, and you know I'm not talking about the prom dress. I'm talking about clothing that you can wear every day. At home, I like to wear a dress, but now don't think that I don't wear pants. I wear them under my dress. You can get all kinds of warm things to wear under your dress, and also to protect your legs even in summer. So one thing that learning to look at clothing in a different way, learning to look at dresses as a ministry, something to wear something different every day, is such a delight. And one thing that it does for you, you start looking at your surroundings. You start looking at the world with a more artistic eye. You start noticing when things start to blossom. You start noticing when things start turning into the fall colors. You start noticing things that you might not have seen before. The light, the darkness, the little sparkle here and there on water, or the sparkle on the snow, and you start noticing things and comparing it to fabric. And you've seen me do this on my blog, where I'll take a picture of the sparkle on the snow or the water, and I'll try to make clothing that has that element in it. And so another thing that clothing, you might not think that clothing matters, but let's go through, just briefly touch on some of the highlights of the Bible with clothing. So we started with Adam and Eve, where clothing was mentioned. And now we'll go to, let's say, Joseph and his coat of many colors, on how his father made a coat with many colors. We're not sure what the fabric was. It may have been linen, it may have been animal skins, it may have been just anything that they had available to them. But it was very important for this little boy, and it made the boy feel important, and the father was giving him a gift, and it was clothing. And often clothing was used as a reward in the Old Testament, or a symbol of importance. For example, when Hannah, the wife of Elkanah in the book of Samuel, went with her husband to worship, that was also a time when people bought gifts, and he bought her more gifts, and because she was so unhappy that she couldn't have children at that time. But later on, when she had a child, Samuel, she brought him a coat every year. So either she made it or had someone else make it. So that piece of clothing was so important. And coats were so important because they were also things that you could bundle your possessions in and carry. You could also roll them up and sit on them, and you could roll them out and lay on them, and they were considered a very, very important garment, and they were passed from family to family, from father to son, and that sort of thing. So you go through the Bible, you can find a lot of references to clothing. Then you go on further, and you'll find the priests and how they had to dress, and the colors. You start reading about colors of fabrics and of clothing, and you start to understand that colors have meanings too. So I'd encourage you to do a study of colors. For instance, in the Bible, white was considered a sign of purity, but also freshness, and blue was dignity and royalty, as well as purple. There are other things that the Bible talks about in the area of clothing. For example, let's go to the New Testament with Tabitha, or what was her other name? She had a little clothing business where she was sewing clothing for the poor, because when she died, people mourned her so much and brought clothing to show the apostles, this is what she made for me. And so clothing was so so important. And it's also used in figures of speech in the Bible. Talked about being clothed in righteousness and clothed in this and clothed in that. And it was talking about the garments that were divided amongst people, and that Jesus left his garment in the tomb folded, neatly with a cloth folded, and the clothing throughout the Bible and throughout life, I believe, is important to God, and He provides. And what about Jesus' admonition that having food and clothing therewith be content? And I'm convinced that we don't spend enough time on going through our clothing and choosing the best and considering all the seasons that you need to create or provide clothing for, considering what you look like every day, what your children look like, not just throwing something on, but showing them, you have to have this button this way or tuck this way, or now clothing is something that is just thrown on, and everybody wants a status shoe or something like that. But let's talk about beauty in clothing too. This is something that I think is really, really being overlooked, is beauty. And beauty is when you start to look at the world in a sense of, I'm going to look for something beauty. Like I'm looking out, I live in the country, so I'm looking out a window at some beautiful mountains with snow on the caps of them. And then I see a beautiful green field beneath that. And I see some beautiful tulips that are coming up. So all that goes into my collection of beauty and beautiful things that I want to see in my clothing too. So I hope that this has helped you, and that I hope today that I want you to experiment with something. Dress up for the home in something. What I'm wearing is 100% cotton, except for, I believe, the little bit of glitter that's on it, that's been painted on it or something. But dress up in something that's comfortable for the home, that is also pretty. You can even, if you can't sew, you can get very pretty long sleeve t-shirts at Walmart that have a print on them that's very nice. And you can get dresses in some places, but dress in something really pretty. Start your day out with your appearance in mind first, and then experiment the next day with not caring and just throwing something on, wearing something dreary. And take notes of how you feel, what you get done, how people respond to you, what happens to you, how you handled a situation. Just take general notes of how the day felt to you. Every day is such a gift from God. You don't know if you're going to have another one. So if this were your last day, why not dress up as though it were the most important day of your life? If this were, let's suggest maybe that you can even have a holiday in your own home by dressing well. And so to protect your clothing, if you're at home, you can wear an apron over it, and there's just no end to the styles and designs of aprons you can wear. If you are having trouble getting used to wearing nice clothes or dresses, and you worry about them, buy some pretty, or make some pretty aprons that you could change every day. My mother-in-law had a whole drawer full of them. She had one for nearly every day and one for Sunday, and her Sunday apron was a crocheted white cotton apron that was just really pretty. And so wear an apron. Maybe all you wear is black, but wear a pretty apron over it, and the apron has a little skirt, and it's just so pretty that it's just going to make a difference in your life. So I hope you have a wonderful day. And I wanted to say that on videos, I don't have comments on YouTube because I'm not ready to take care of any more social media. All I can handle is my blog. So it's a storage place for videos that I'm making for my vlog. So please leave a comment, and I hope you dress up today, and I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you. Goodbye.